Welcome back to the memory lane, folks. Today, I want to share a story about a quiet mystery that took me an entire lifetime to solve, a story about what it truly means to keep a promise. For as long as I can remember, my father's left hand was perfectly, undeniably bare. Now, if you grew up back in the 50s and 60s, you know how society looked at things. A gold band on a man's ring finger was his quiet badge of honor. It was the universal shorthand for a life shared, a sacred declaration to the community that he belonged to a woman, a home, and a shared covenant. Yet, my father walked through this world with an empty space on his finger. It was a smooth, unbroken expanse of skin that caught the morning light whenever he reached for his cracked ceramic coffee mug, whenever he gripped the worn leather steering wheel of our old Ford pickup, and whenever he folded his massive, work-worn hands to say grace over a platter of fried chicken and biscuits. As a boy growing up, I never gave it a second thought. Children view their fathers as permanent fixtures of the landscape, like the ancient white oak tree in the front yard or the rolling hills that marked the edge of our property. You just accept their habits as unquestionable truths. But as the years rolled on, and the world began to change into a faster, louder place, a modern era where commitments are loudly broadcasted, physically flaunted, and measured by the size of a gemstone, that bare finger began to stand out to me. It became a quiet anomaly in my mind. Today, it seems like folks are always looking for ways to signal their love to the outside world. We use platinum, diamonds, and flashy anniversary parties to prove we care. Yet, my father, a man who loved my mother with a fierce, quiet devotion for over 50 years, navigated his entire life without a single ounce of jewelry. He never explained why, and my mother never once asked him to wear one. It was just a silent, unspoken understanding between them. That is, until a crisp late autumn afternoon, when the wind was whistling through the dry corn husks outside, and a simple discovery in the back of a dusty, forgotten drawer changed everything I thought I knew about my parents' life together. I was up in the attic of the old farmhouse, rummaging through a heavy oak dresser that had belonged to my grandparents. Right at the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of faded seed catalogs from 1974 and some yellowed newspaper clippings about the county fair, my fingers brushed against a small, velvet box. The dark blue velvet was worn smooth at the corners, carrying that faint, comforting scent of cedar, old paper, and time gone by. I pulled it into the dim light of the attic window, brushed off the dust, and gently pried the rusted hinge open. Inside, resting on a small, yellowed satin cushion, was a simple, unadorned yellow gold band. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive. It was just a plain, classic, slightly scratched circle of gold. But tucked neatly inside the ring was a small, folded piece of lined ledger paper. It bore my father's handwriting, small, neat, and precise, the way he used to keep track of the cattle weights or label the mason jars of pickled peaches in the cellar. The ink had faded to a soft, warm brown. It read simply, until the very end, Sarah. Holding that ring in the quiet of the attic, with the autumn sun setting over the barn, a profound realization washed over me. The absence of the ring on my father's hand wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a lack of affection or a sign of a distant marriage. It was something far more deliberate. It was the physical relic of a hidden history, a testament to a time when survival demanded everything they had, and love was measured in rows hoed, bills paid, and promises kept in the dark. To truly understand why that gold band spent decades resting in a dark velvet box rather than on my father's finger, we have to travel back across the years to a time when the weather and the bank account ruled our lives. My parents didn't start their journey with a nest egg, a modern retirement plan, or the comfortable stability that folks expect today. They started their marriage in the biting chill of a Great Plains winter, in a tiny, drafty rent house where you could hear the wind howling through the floorboards. During those early years, a wedding ring, even a simple one from the Sears Roebuck catalog, represented an impossible luxury. Every single nickel they made was a matter of life and death for the farm. Their budget wasn't written on a computer. It was scratched out on the back of an envelope at the kitchen table by the light of a kerosene lamp. A single dollar meant the difference between buying a bag of flour to bake bread or going without. It was an era of patched denim, turning collars and darning socks until there was more yarn than original cotton left. In that unforgiving world, spending money on a piece of jewelry would have meant sacrificing the very ground beneath their feet. It would have meant going without winter fuel for the stove, or delaying the seed purchase for the spring planting. So, my parents made a private, unspoken pact. They sat together on the edge of their mattress one night and decided to prioritize survival, the health of their babies, and the future of their land over material symbols. They agreed, without a single tear or moment of regret, that the promises they made to one another in the eyes of God were meant to be lived in the dirt, not displayed on a finger. They decided that a warm hearth, a full pantry, and a secure foundation for their children were the truest expressions of a marriage vow. I can still picture my father looking at his hands during those lean years. They were the hands of a true country lineman and farmer, calloused, scarred from barbed wire, and stained with grease from fixing the tractor engine in the middle of a freezing night. He consciously chose to leave them bare. That empty ring finger became his daily, tactile reminder of the sacrifice required to build a future. Every time he washed the field dirt off his hands at the kitchen sink, he wasn't mourning the absence of a ring. He was looking at a daily commitment to a higher purpose. It was a silent, unbreakable promise to my mother. I will provide for you. I will keep the cold away from our children, and I will sweat blood before I let this family fail. By foregoing the jewelry, they were investing every spare penny into the bedrock of our home. That empty finger spoke volumes about the grit of their love. It was a love stripped of pretense, a love that understood the harsh realities of a bad harvest and rose above it through mutual respect and shared hardship. For years, I had looked at that bare hand and seen only what was missing. But after finding that blue velvet box, I began to see it for what it truly was, a beautiful monument to a covenant born of scarcity. My father didn't wear a ring because every ounce of his strength, every dollar he earned, was being channeled into the roof over our heads and the food on our plates. It was a quiet, daily sacrifice that lasted a lifetime, proving that the deepest roots of a marriage are grown not in the sunlight of prosperity, but in the dark, fertile soil of shared struggle. As I grew into a man myself and experienced the ups and downs of adult life, I began to truly understand the nature of commitment. In our modern culture, we're taught that love has to be loud. We're told it needs to be seen by everyone, validated by grand gestures, expensive anniversary trips, and public declarations. We've equated the glittering signifiers of romance with the depth of the heart itself. But looking back at my father's life in our little country town, I learned that love is often loudest when it's completely silent. True devotion doesn't care about an outward display. It thrives in the quiet, unglamorous labor of presence. My father's commitment to my mother wasn't proven at a jeweler's counter. It was proven through a lifetime of steady, dependable labor. My father was a man of the old school. He didn't know how to write flowery poetry, and he certainly didn't have the words to make grand speeches at family gatherings. If you asked him about his feelings, he'd likely clear his throat, look out at the pasture, and tell you the weather was turning. But his love didn't need words. It had a language all its own, the language of service. I remember the brutal winter blizzards of my childhood, the kind that would dump 2 feet of snow on our gravel road and freeze the pipes solid. Long before the sun even thought about peeking over the eastern horizon, while my sister and I were still warm under 3 layers of homemade quilts, I would hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of my father's work boots on the porch. I'd wipe the frost off my bedroom window and see him out there in the freezing dark, his breath rising like white smoke in the beam of his flashlight. He'd be clearing the snow off my mother's car, scraping the thick ice from the windshield, and starting the engine so the heater would be blowing warm air by the time she had to drive to her job at the county school. He did it day after day, year after year. He never asked for a thank you. He never complained about the frostbite stinging his ears. He did it simply because she was his wife, and it was his duty to make her path through this hard world just a little bit smoother. And I remember the suffocating heat of July, when the humidity was so thick you could feel it in your lungs, and the cicadas were buzzing like buzzsaws in the elm trees. My father would come home from a 12-hour day of hauling hay, his denim shirt soaked through with sweat, his face lined with pure exhaustion. Yet, instead of sitting down in his favorite chair, he'd walk straight out to the kitchen garden. He'd spend an hour pulling weeds from my mother's tomato patches, fixing the chicken wire to keep the rabbits out, or carrying heavy buckets of well water to her prize-winning rose bushes. His commitment wasn't a piece of metal on his hand. It was the ache in his lower back. It was embedded in the deep lines around his eyes, the calluses on his palms, and the quiet, rock-solid way he showed up for his family every single day. He was our anchor. We never had to wonder if he would be there, because his presence was as dependable as the sunrise. He didn't need to tell us he loved my mother. We saw it in the way he always gave her the best piece of meat at dinner, the way he listened to her advice on the farm finances, and the way he looked at her when she sang hymns in the church choir. This realization challenges us to rethink what a vow really means. We live in a world where it's so easy to perform affection for an audience, to show off our relationships, while neglecting the daily, mundane work that keeps a marriage alive. My father's life is a reminder that a vow isn't just something you say once in a white church, dressed in your Sunday best. A vow is a choice you make every single morning when you get out of bed. It's a promise you keep when you're tired, when money is short, and when the romance of youth turns into the slow, steady endurance of old age. My father's bare left hand was a lifelong sermon on that very truth. It was a declaration that his love didn't need a prop to be real. It was a quiet challenge to the world, proving that the most profound forms of devotion are the ones that never ask for an audience, but choose instead to build a sanctuary of trust within the walls of a humble home. But as every old-timer knows, the seasons of life keep turning, whether we're ready for them or not. The years began to take their inevitable toll on my father. The strong, tireless man of my youth, the man who could hoist a 100-pound sack of feed onto his shoulder without blinking, began to slow down. His stride shortened, his hands began to tremble, and his hair turned the color of a winter sky. The day eventually came when the farm machinery fell silent, and my father found himself confined to a sterile bed in the county hospital. It was during those long, quiet days, with the afternoon sun slanting through the hospital blinds, that the mystery of the bare hand reached its beautiful, heartbreaking end. The room was quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic hum of the medical monitors and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. My mother never left his side. She sat in that uncomfortable vinyl chair for hours on end, her small hand enveloping his large, frail one, rubbing his knuckles and whispering stories about the old days on the farm. One quiet evening, as the shadows were lengthening across the room, my father opened his eyes and looked at me. His voice was barely a whisper, but it had that same steady weight it always did. He asked me to go back to the farmhouse and find the blue velvet box in the old oak dresser. He didn't have to explain why. I knew. I drove down that dark gravel road, walked into the quiet, empty house, and retrieved the box from the back of the drawer. When I returned to the hospital room, the nurses had dimmed the lights. My father was resting, his breathing shallow and slow. I gently set the faded velvet box on his bedside table and opened the lid. Under the soft lamplight, that simple gold band seemed to glow with a warmth all its own. My mother stood up and approached the bed. She looked at my father's hand, the hand that had cleared the snow, tilled the soil, and held her close through 54 years of life's storms. It was thin now, the skin papery and pale, a beautiful map of a life well lived. With trembling fingers and tears silently tracing the familiar wrinkles on her cheeks, my mother lifted the gold ring from its satin cushion. She took my father's left hand in hers. Slowly, deliberately, and with a reverence that made the entire room feel like holy ground, She slid the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. It was as if that finger had been waiting for that exact piece of gold for over half a century. After decades of waiting, after a lifetime of putting duty, survival, and family above everything else, the circle was finally closed. The original promise they had made to each other as broke kids in the middle of nowhere was finally, visibly fulfilled. The emotional weight in that hospital room was heavy enough to take your breath away. It felt as though every single quiet act of devotion, every freezing morning, every hot summer afternoon, and every unspoken prayer had converged into that one simple movement. It wasn't just a ring sliding onto a finger, it was the crowning of a king. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of a covenant kept. My father opened his eyes and looked down at his hand. He saw the gold band shining against his weathered skin. A slow, peaceful smile spread across his face, the most contented, serene expression I had seen on him since his illness began. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That simple ring spoke louder than a choir of angels. It was a moment of complete and total closure, a beautiful validation of a love that had stood against the wind and come out unbroken. That small piece of gold, which had spent so many years hidden away in the dark, finally took its rightful place in the light. It symbolized a promise kept through every single season of life, through the lean years and the good ones, through the laughter and the tears. And seeing it there on his work-worn hand at the very end, I realized that the long wait had given that gold a deeper, richer meaning than it ever could have had if he had worn it from day one. It wasn't the start of their story. It was the final, beautiful exclamation point on a masterpiece. Sitting there in the quiet hospital room, watching my father sleep with his ring finally on his finger, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The story of my father's wedding ring isn't just a memory to comfort our family. It's a timeless lesson for anyone who has ever loved another human being. It taught me that real devotion doesn't live in the things we show off to the world. It lives in the quiet, invisible spaces of sacrifice, consistency, and showing up when nobody is looking. My father's life showed me that a marriage vow isn't a piece of jewelry. It's a life lived for someone else. It's found in the small, unglamorous choices, the decision to do without so your children can have what they need, the willingness to carry a heavy load so your partner can rest, and the steadfast faithfulness that doesn't waver when the world gets hard. True love is the scrape of a shovel in the dark, the sweat on a brow in July, and the quiet comfort of a hand that never lets go. This story is a reminder for all of us to look a little closer at the people in our own lives. We live in a world that's always trying to sell us the next shiny thing, always telling us to judge a life by its outward success and its visible symbols. But if you want to find the truest, deepest love in this world, you have to look for the invisible rings. You have to look for the folks who show up without any fanfare. We need to cherish the people who do the hard, quiet work of loving us every single day, the ones who hold our world together with their bare hands, who stand by us when the crops fail or the jobs disappear, and who build a foundation of safety beneath our feet. Their devotion doesn't need a billboard or a diamond to be real. It's real because it's written in their actions. As I look back on my father's legacy, I'm struck by how the most profound lessons in life are often the ones we never see coming until the very end. For years, I thought that bare hand was a riddle, a missing piece of the puzzle. It took me a lifetime and the discovery of a dusty velvet box to realize that his bare hand was never an absence of love. It was the ultimate display of it. The gold band that finally found its home on his finger was the perfect ending to a beautiful journey. It didn't change how much he loved my mother. It just pulled back the curtain so the rest of us could see the beauty of the promise he had kept for over 50 years. His legacy is one of quiet strength, of total selflessness, and of a deep, country-strong love that weathered every storm and filled our home with grace. As you go about your week, folks, I hope you'll carry my father's story in your heart. Take a look around you and look for those quiet, invisible rings of love in your own family. Take a moment to thank the people who show you they care through their sacrifices, rather than their words. Let's all strive to build lives and marriages that are defined not by what we wear on the outside, but by the steadfast, unwavering love we give to the ones who matter most. Thank you for walking down the memory lane with me today. I hope this story brought a little warmth to your heart and reminded you of the quiet heroes in your own life. Until next time, take care of yourselves, look out for your neighbors, and cherish every single memory along the way. God bless you.